Hi there, everyone. Good day to you all. I hope you're all doing well. I would like to begin with a warm welcome, both on my behalf, but also on behalf of SciMingo and SciComm Academy. And thank you for taking the time to listen to this recorded talk. Now, I was supposed to give a online lunch talk, an online live lunch talk on the 14th of November, but due to some unforeseen circumstances, we had to cancel that, and I sincerely apologize for this. And while it's not quite the same, I do hope that this recorded talk serves as a good enough alternative. Of course, there won't be any Q&A at the end, but do please feel free to reach out to either me or Julie if you still have any additional questions or would like to discuss our research any further. We'll be very happy to answer them. I believe you can find our email addresses on the final slides, or simply search for our names on LinkedIn and then you'll find us very easily. So let's dive in. The main topic of today is epistemic injustice and science communication. And to be a bit more precise, I'll be talking about our empirical study, our qualitative empirical study on the experiences of female researchers from both ethnic majority and minority groups in Flanders with what philosophers call testimonial injustice during science communication. Some of you might already be a bit more familiar with these concepts, especially the philosophers amongst you, while for others they may be new. But please don't worry about that. I'll explain everything throughout this presentation. But first, let me just briefly go through the structure of my presentation. Now, what's on the menu for today? I'll start with a brief background of this research project, the context in which it took place, why it was conducted, and also how it came about. After that, I'll move on to the second part, where I'll explain the main concepts, such as epistemic injustice, testimonial injustice, intersectionality, and obviously also science communication. I'll also explain the two central research questions, and then our research methodology. In the third part, which will also be the longest, I'll go through our research findings and share many quotes that illustrate these findings. Finally, in the last part, I'll give a quick recap and wrap up with a few final remarks. So let's start. On the left side, you can see me. My name is Seppe van Bladel. I am a recent philosophy graduate from the University of Antwerp, so I guess you can now call me a philosopher. And my main interests lie in philosophical issues at the intersection of feminist philosophy, ethics, applied ethics, and empirically engaged philosophy. On the right side, you can see Julie de Smet, a science communicator and former researcher in communication sciences. Her work mainly involves helping, but also inspiring researchers and knowledge institutes to create societal impact through science communication. So bringing their research beyond the academic and scientific worlds. For my master thesis, we decided to join forces, combining our perspectives to explore a research question at the crossroads of philosophy and science communication. How exactly did this come about? Like I said, I recently graduated, and that of course involved completing a master thesis. So I opted for the thesis with practical experience, which involves conducting a practice and action-oriented research question, so a question aimed at fostering social change, alongside gaining 40 hours of voluntary hands-on experience with an organization outside of the university. All of this was combined with the course Community Service Learning, which is a course at the University of Antwerp, where students learn to apply their academic skills to engage with societal challenges. Now, I was looking for an organization to collaborate with, and I believe it was through Instagram that I came across Julie de Smet, and she was one of the first people who was really enthusiastic about working with a philosophy student. And while brainstorming about potential interesting research questions, she mentioned to me that female researchers often tell her that they aren't taken seriously by their audiences and are unsure how to handle this. I then immediately thought this aligns with my primary philosophical interest, epistemic injustice, which I'll explain in a moment. Now, we of course already know from lots of studies that biases against female researchers are widespread. One American study indicates that successful scientists are more often associated with so-called masculine traits, such as ambition and authority, whereas so-called feminine traits, such as helpfulness and generosity, are less linked to scientific success. Female researchers in STEM fields, another study showed, often face persistent stereotypes after engaging in science communication. They're perceived as bossy, less credible, and are frequently judged based on their appearance. Now, a bit closer to home, the sociologist and professor Dunja Boraben conducted important research on everyday sexism and gendered racism in the Flemish academic world. Her interview studies with female PhD students and postdocs revealed that they often experience patronization, which means that they're undervalued both as an individual but also as an academic. For instance, female academics from ethnic minority groups are told that they cannot be both religious and objective, and their academic skills are not taken seriously, often through interrogation. Philosophers would describe all of this as a form of epistemic injustice. And to put it simply, epistemic injustice comes down to a wrong, an injustice, so something we find immoral, inflicted on someone, specifically in their capacity as a knower, where they are denied recognition as a legitimate bearer of knowledge and thus are not treated as someone capable of gaining, processing, but also communicating legitimate knowledge. So, for instance, when a female researcher of color is not recognized as a legitimate source of scientific knowledge, because of the fact that she's a female of color, we speak of epistemic injustice, when, as a result, her insights are not taken seriously in social interactions by, for instance, male colleagues, we speak of testimonial injustice, a specific form of epistemic injustice. This is defined as an injustice that occurs when a negative identity prejudice against a social group causes a hearer to attribute a credibility deficit or a lower level of credibility to the words and knowledge of a speaker from that social group. But let me give you another concrete example, which will help you better understand and imagine what we're talking about. Introduction to primatologist Dr. Jane Goodall is hardly necessary. She is widely regarded as one of the world's leading experts in both anthropology and primatology, and she is especially celebrated for her groundbreaking research into the social interactions of wild chimpanzees. Given her exceptional expertise, she is, as economist and philosopher Fabian Medvecky states, one of the most reliable authorities on the subject of chimpanzees. Now, if we fail to take her seriously simply because she's a woman, we commit a form of epistemic injustice. Let me read the quote aloud. A high degree of credibility is bestowed on Jane Goodall's claims about the social interactions of chimpanzees. We trust her more than we would trust almost anyone else, as she has a high level of knowledge on the subject. In this case, Goodall is treated justly as an epistemic agent. For example, to dismiss Goodall's claims on the grounds that she's a woman and that such knowledge is beyond the reach of women would be to treat Goodall unjustly from an epistemic standpoint. So this epistemic injustice, and specifically testimonial injustice, is what we set out to study empirically. More specifically, our research focused on two central questions. The first one was, what experiences do female researchers from underrepresented groups in Flanders have with testimonial injustice during science communication, which was an exploratory goal, gathering data for the first time. And then our second question was, what do they consider important for bringing about social change, which is an action-oriented goal. We approach this research using a victim-centered perspective, conducting qualitative empirical research that placed the lived experiences of 10 female researchers who have encountered this injustice at the center of our study. This was done through 2 focus groups and 4 in-depth interviews. Now, to analyze the data, we used a specific approach combining insights from grounded theory and intersectionality. On the one hand, we examined how gender and the intersection of gender and ethnicity influences the credibility of female researchers. On the other hand, we avoided imposing a large theoretical framework, instead letting the theory emerge inductively from the data. Okay, I think it's about time we go through our main research findings now. So, what experiences do female researchers from underrepresented groups in Flanders have with testimonial injustice during science communication? So, our data clearly revealed that female researchers are subjected to 4 specific forms of testimonial injustice. The first one is being subjected to a high burden of proof. The second one is explicit attempts to undermine their knowledge claims and state it as an expert. Then the third one is more implicit attempts to undermine their knowledge claims and state it as an expert. And then the fourth one is a lack of willingness to listen to core. Although these manifestations vary, they all share a common core. They are forms of identity-based knowledge evaluation. This means the credibility, value, and relevance of the researcher's knowledge, expertise, and skills are diminished based on their identity. This goes beyond simply questioning or doubting their knowledge, it actively undermines and minimizes their intellectual contributions. I'll now go through each of these forms, explain them, and illustrate them with some quotes. Number 1. Being subjected to a high burden of proof. This form of testimonial injustice involves being persistently questioned, doubted, interrupted, and facing barriers to knowledge sharing due to physical identity characteristics. Participant 4 explains that because of the combination of her gender and the topic of her research expertise, she is often subjected to unsolicited questioning and skepticism after public lectures, typically from men. I often find that after a lecture, men feel they can still add something to my talk. That they say, "Have you read this or have you looked at that?" and then start telling their own story. I also once had that a man come up to me and said something like, "Honestly, I think you can do better." And then he walked away. Participant 7 shares a similar experience. She faces non-substantive questioning and doubt from audiences, not just because of her gender and her research topic, but also due to her age. After giving a public lecture, an audience member dismissed her knowledge in a lengthy critique that ignored her expertise. But you get the classic, yeah, remarks. People would then talk for 10 minutes about, and then, not hearing what you're saying. And then I think I'm not going to keep trying to convince those people. For participant 3, a researcher from an ethnic minority group, the issue goes even further. She sometimes feels that having a white male researcher present her findings might ensure the message is better received. Oh, sometimes we think to ourselves, oh, I'd almost rather have a white man present my research, something I've worked on so hard. Because as a researcher, you almost think, as long as my research gets attention, it's not about me. Second form of testimonial injustice involves highly explicit attempts to undermine the knowledge claims and expertise of female researchers. These include openly denigrating remarks, but also being pinned down into specific topics unrelated to their area of expertise. Participant 10 shares that during public educational walks, people sometimes deliberately make toxic remarks related to the fact that she is a black woman speaking on a particular topic. But on the other hand, and that also brings stress because you know that, and that's what I'm going to talk about. Yes, toxic lines, I would say. People will go along with the idea of, okay, we're going to get that woman, and people will make quite toxic remarks. In a similar way, Participant 2, a Muslim woman wearing a headscarf, describes being intentionally interrupted during a public science event and demeaned by an audience member who equated her presence with being a McDonald's employee. You're standing on a platform, just explaining your research. Overall, it's a very pleasant experience, but a few times I've had someone suddenly come up to me, stand right in front of me. I remember one particular idiot who came up to me and said, "Yeah, I have a question." "Okay, please introduce yourself, but could you keep some distance?" "Yeah, yeah. Where's the McDonald's?" Right in the middle of my explanation. At that moment, I thought, you can clearly see that I'm not the person to ask these questions right now. Participant 4 recalls a male journalist projecting his frustrations onto her as a female researcher. He persistently questioned her on a topic unrelated to her research. And then I really had one terrible moment with punchy as an interviewer. I noticed that he was really trying to place his frustration as a man onto me. So he also started to really question a study with a broad claim about entirely leaning towards Third form of testimonial injustice also involves undermining knowledge claims and the status of an expert, but in more implicit, less direct, and subtle ways. This occurs through reducing scientific insights to personal experiences and by overemphasizing the speaker's passion. Participant 8 shares that her scientific insights are sometimes perceived as personal experiences due to her gender, ethnicity, and the topic of her research. For instance, this happened when she was invited to speak at a public event about her research as a doctoral student. And during the introduction, and then again in the closing remarks and thank yous, the moderator, who is a kind person and genuinely appreciated my time and energy, kept thanking me for sharing my experiences and emotions with them. I corrected her once, saying that I was there to share knowledge based on research and solid work. Another subtle way to undermine knowledge claims and the status as an expert is by emphasizing their passion, which indirectly suggests that their substantive contributions are less valuable. This happened to participant 4. Or other people would then just say things like, who emphasize my sympathy. A lot, someone said, yeah, you have a great likability factor. So I'm standing there with a smile, I'm a young girl, and I can explain things well, so people will listen to you. But there's also something very denigrating about saying it like that. Ah, yes, your passion. Terrible. Not your knowledge or anything, right? Like, whoa, you've done such research. Or fourth and final way of female researchers' knowledge and expertise being undermined is when audiences actively choose not to listen. This lack of willingness, this lack of listening attitude includes twisting their words, asking questions that were already answered, or focusing only on irrelevant aspects of their work. Participant 9 had an example of how her expertise was not taken seriously during a media appearance. I won a few awards, and much of the press covered it in a way that was more or less like, she won this award. But the point is, I gave a full interview about my project, what I want to do in the future, and everything. And then the article's title was just, she won this award, with nothing about my project. Yes, I still remember that. It was really painful. Participant 7 described a similar experience during public lectures, where it became clear that some audience members were not paying any attention. This was evident from the questions they asked afterwards, despite these points already being addressed. And then you can explain it as clearly and as well as possible, because I'm usually not nervous when I have to do something like that, and I'm not standing there, shaking or anything. But still, yeah. And yet, those comments or questions sometimes come up, which shows that they haven't been listening, that they're asking a question that contradicts what you just said. Asked about the emotions and feelings they experience during negative encounters with science communication, mainly two sets of negative emotions emerge. On the one hand, you had feelings of hurt and insecurity, and on the other, you had feelings of frustration and irritation. Participant 2 shared that her previous negative experiences have left her feeling less confident about what she shares during science communication. I think that because of the experience I've had, I've just become more insecure about what I have to say. Participant 6 mentioned that growing up in poverty has left her often feeling like she needs to prove herself. When an event organizer questioned her integrity as a researcher, it caused her to feel deeply saddened. Yes, mainly a lot of sadness. It's not that well, I'm not angry or anything. Not at all. In addition to feelings of hurt and insecurity, many participants also expressed frustration and irritation. For participant 10, science communication can be emotionally draining because the negative experiences she encounters often target her identity as a black woman. But it's not like emotional or stress about an exam or defending before a professor. It's mainly emotional because your identity is being strongly attacked. Like, how do I deal with that brown monkey? I know I'm being very blunt. And then you have to stand there really strong. To the negative emotions of hurt, insecurity, frustration, and irritation, several participants have developed strategies to protect themselves and their well-being. These strategies include avoiding certain organizations or people, consulting with colleagues about who will be involved in science communication, checking with acquaintances or colleagues who have experience with specific forms of science communication, and also offering support to each other after negative encounters. Participant 2 explains that she often checks with acquaintances or colleagues about their experiences with a specific form of science communication. Yes, when I want to apply for something, then it's always a matter of checking if there are people who have already done it, and I'll ask them an extra question, like how did it go? What kind of people are there? Yes, all of that does play a role for me. In addition to self-protection strategies, the data also revealed anticipatory communication strategies aimed at being taken seriously. These strategies include establishing their authority by clearly stating their expertise in advance, communicating sharply and confidently, as well as being cautious in communication. Participant 9 shared that while she doesn't want to appear overly confident, she adopts a sharp and assertive communication style to avoid leaving any room for being dismissed. When I speak, I almost seem like a different character. People often find it almost surprising to get to know me personally and then to hear me speak or present and things like that. Because there's such a big difference as I put up so many walls. I come across as quite confident and leave almost no room for doubt from the audience. Participant 4 mentions that she fears losing the audience when communicating too assertively, which is why she tends to communicate more empathetically. Yes, because I notice that I still, whenever someone is, I don't know, disrespectful or something, I already start anticipating it by being overly friendly or something, always really playing up the likability factor that they think I have. I always find that difficult because if I take a more assertive stance, I sometimes fear that I'll lose people on the content. So by now we've talked about the experiences with testimonial injustice, the emotions associated with it, and self-protection and anticipatory strategies. Now let's move on to the second research question. What do they consider important for bringing about social change? The short answer is synergistic measures and efforts. Different actors combining their efforts in ways that have a greater impact than individual actions. Means that, according to the participants of our study, reactive institutional measures are only effective if they are clearly communicated to researchers and if trust in institutions as support providers is restored, but also if they are combined with preventive institutional measures. These, in turn, are only effective if impactful courses on discrimination and inclusion in science communication are provided by both actors from the science communication field, such as science communication organizations, and the institutions themselves. In short, all efforts and measures were seen as valuable, but only when integrated and implemented in a coordinated way. I'll explain this in more detail in the following slides. A recent study by the sociologist and professor Pieter Paul Verhagen examined how helpful academics find certain measures in addressing academic bullying and harassment. One key measure highlighted was a clear promotion of contact points where academics can report such incidents. According to the study, 51.1% of female academics and 40.2% of male academics indicated that they would find this measure very helpful. Now, the importance of visible contact points and clear communication about support and reporting options also came true in our research. When asked whether they knew where to report or file a complaint after a negative experience with science communication, 6 out of 10 participants in our study did not know where to turn. As one participant explained, but I honestly wouldn't know where I could go with it, whether at my university or my university college, and whether they would take me seriously in this matter. So there's definitely also a need for more visibility and clear communication of support and reporting options with regards to science communication. Now, the issue isn't just about communication and visibility, it's also about the low trust in institutional support measures, such as reporting systems, supervisor support, psychological counseling, and legal assistance. Let me again start with the findings from the Hague studies. Around 38.5% of female academics and 36.5% of male academics find institutional support in cases of legal threats very helpful. Then 42.4% of female academics and 55% of male academics see providing psychological support to victims of harassment and bullying as very helpful. However, when we look at our study, we see a different story. While most participants acknowledge that these measures could help in theory, many do not trust their institutions enough to actually use them. This comes from negative past experience with hostility, discrimination, and a lack of meaningful institutional action within their institution. For example, participant 8 told us she doesn't turn to her institution for help because she fears it. I have not turned to my institution for help because, again, I fear the institution. The most I would trust within the institution is my faculty. And again, I have never tried to make use of the available complaint procedures. Participant 6 shared a similar lack of trust in her own institution. I don't think I would know where to go or have the trust to talk about it, to be honest. So I don't think I feel safe at this moment to share that in any context. Participant 4 described how unhelpful institutional support can feel. There's also a big difference between knowing where you can go and the effectiveness of that service. In my case, they could only say either you file a complaint, but I didn't want that at all, because then your whole career is basically over. Or they could just listen. So I had a conversation, relived everything that happened, which was super awful. And then it was just like, yeah, really unfortunate. And that was it. So, what do we make out of this? I cannot emphasize enough that it is so important that even if institutions communicate their measures well, they also need to function internally and build trust before female researchers feel safe reporting negative experiences with science communication. Without that trust, even the best measures will fail to make a real impact. Apart from clear communication, reactive institutional measures, and building trust, participants also emphasize the importance of preventive actions, such as establishing ethical codes to clarify acceptable communication practices in science communication settings. Both participant 8, 5, and 6 highlighted that these guidelines should apply not only to researchers, but also to external organizations and stakeholders involved in science communication. These rules would create a reliable framework and avoid reliance on subjective interpretations in each situation. For example, participant 6 explained, if it's constantly viewed on a case-by-case basis, that's not ideal, so there must be clear guidelines. I think an ethical code might be a good way to address this. Yes, because then you also have a kind of measuring instrument you can rely on. Because what we're talking about now is also somewhat subjectively loaded, right? How you relate to others. That's not necessarily objectively measurable, but I do think there are standards to make this more controlled. At the same time, participant 9 added that these rules should not just be imposed but created in a participatory way. I don't believe that change happens by introducing new rules. It happens by creating new rules together. In summary, ethical codes should serve as a proactive and inclusive foundation for setting behavioral norms in science communication, ensuring that everyone, researchers and stakeholders alike, operates within clear and agreed upon boundaries. Finally, respondents emphasize the urgent need for impactful courses and training on discrimination and inclusion in science communication, organized by both science communication organizations but also research and knowledge institutions. These training sessions must go beyond the strategic aspect of communication to address the human experience within science communication. Participant 3, a female researcher from an ethnic minority group, expressed this sentiment clearly. They never thought about you as a person. It was always about the content, how you communicate it. Don't talk too long, don't talk too fast, and here you're supposed to raise your voice at the end of your sentence. Okay, but also, could you look at me and see that I am protected? So, in summary, science communication trainings must go beyond teaching strategic communication techniques, and it should also focus on awareness, prevention, protection, and how to handle negative experiences, as well as other critical aspects of discrimination in science communication, such as bystander training. Now, I promise, as a final note, participants in our study emphasize that these trainings should not be optional but mandatory, ensuring that everyone participates. They also stress that they should target all groups, not just victims, because only focusing on victims places an undue burden on them. For example, journalists could also greatly benefit from such trainings. Lastly, participants noted that these trainings must be delivered by someone with the appropriate expertise to ensure their effectiveness. I won't read the quotes aloud anymore, as the presentation is already running a bit long, but you're welcome to read them yourself later. Okay, we've reached the final slides. Here's a short recap and a few final remarks. Today, we've discussed 4 specific forms of testimonial injustice: a high burden of proof, explicit and implicit ways of undermining knowledge claims and the status of an expert, and finally, a lack of willingness to listen. So, what can we do about it? Or what can institutions and science communication organizations do about it? Here's some homework. Collaborate and adopt integrated measures. Investigate existing initiatives, coordinate efforts at an institutional level, and partner with key players in the field of science communication. In doing so, take into account all the measures and important points I've explained in this talk. But let's also take a step back and reflect on an important question. What do we actually mean by inclusive science communication? Or what do we want inclusive science communication to mean? Is it simply about ensuring that science and knowledge are accessible to everyone? Or does it also mean that anyone, regardless of their gender or ethnicity, can engage in science communication without the fear of being dismissed or not taken seriously? I think it's about time we pay more attention to this. And yes, we of course need more research to investigate this phenomenon, both qualitative and quantitative. But that doesn't mean we should wait any longer to take action. My message is thus very simple. Take responsibility as an institution, or science communication organization and start acting. I hope this research and talk have helped you inspire you to do so. If you want to continue reading, you can find a written report on the website of Julie de Smet. It's in Dutch, or an article in AL Science magazine, and perhaps, but that's not a promise, some more communication, written communication soon. And again, if you have any additional questions or critical remarks, or would like to discuss or research any further, please feel free to contact me or Julie, and then we'll be happy to make some time for that. So thank you for your attention, and see you again. Bye bye.